I gotta take it. Okay, go ahead.
Can I start us off?
I sure will. So thank you, Mayor and Council members. We are going to be doing our second workshop for the capital improvement plan. So the intent for this evening, I don't believe will likely go unless you want to, as long as we get to the first workshop. The intent here is really to show you what's in the plan, what's changed since the first workshop, and if there are no further changes, then this is ultimately what you'll see generally, with the exception of maybe some administrative changes if we have any, that would come before you in August. So this is the agenda. I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point here, but we will again just really quickly do a review of our funding sources. I will then go over the changes since the first workshop, do a kind of a restatement of our summaries, the costs by department and fund, and the funding sources. I'll do a comparison between the first workshop and the second workshop for both of those. Go over then generally get into the levy impacts of what's in the CIP now, revisit the projects that are not included, and then this time I'll also give you a bit of a preview of what these will be for the fiscal plan, kind of a look ahead as we go into the fiscal plan. So just to quickly review the funding sources by fund. I'm not going to get as into this as I did in the first workshop, but we organize our funding sources into capital funds, utility funds, TIDs, special revenue funds, and internal service funds. And any one of these could be looked to as a funding source for the capital improvement plan. And we look at things like cash flow forecasts, the fiscal plan, and projected tax increment revenues for the TIDs, things like this as we decide essentially how much of the project requests we receive we can feasibly fund in each year of the 5-year plan. So the changes that we've made since the first workshop. So there were no council requested changes. In fact, from several council members, we didn't receive any requests for changes. And I believe for the ones that we did receive, none of them have been implemented into the CIP at this point. So what you'll see are changes that Scott and I have made based on funding targets, based on adjusted costs that we've received for things like the fire station, the biosolids facility, and we've done a little reorganizing of the plan based on those things. So for the fire station, we increased the total cost from 8.5 million to 9 million. We moved design to 2025 from 2027, and construction is from 2028 to both 27 and 28. So we're doing more of a phased approach to the construction there, and we moved up design. For infrastructure, we adjusted the DeSanctis Park shelter from 2025 and 2026 to 2027 and 2028. The library, we've taken the project, a large project, a $2.5 million project that is implementing the findings of their facility fitness study, and we're doing more of a phased approach with that compared to what was in the CIP for the first workshop. So we're funding that in roughly equal portions over 4 years. So it's 25% per year over 4 years, with the thought there being that it might provide more of a tangible fundraising target to aim for 25% of the total cost each year over 4 years compared to what was originally in there. For the police department, we've added $21,000 for a flock camera system. It's a license plate recognition system, essentially. For transportation projects, we've added $33,000 to the Locust Street project for design and construction. So this is a sidewalk portion of the project that was not originally in the scope of the project that was in the CIP originally. So we've added that and the cost for that. We also added $54,000 in planning costs for the Foster Street extension project, and we moved land acquisition to 2026. So that's ultimately going to be a phased project. The construction phase of that's actually not in this 5-year window for the CIP, but we did want to make sure we added some funding for planning, because that would come first and foremost in 2025, and then we need to acquire some land for that, which would then take place in 26 after the planning kind of informs what we need to do there. Then construction, I believe, is scheduled tentatively for 2029, so just outside of the 5-year plan.
No, but real quick, so that's Liz Krybeck's property that they're looking at extending for the Foster Street.
5 years.
Used to be.
Yeah, Foster's, I don't know the name of the property either,
Okay,
but it'd be next to Windmill.
yeah, okay, so Liz Krybeck's property. And then do we have, I mean, I looked at that and I didn't think that was even close enough money in there, knowing that we're gonna have to move power lines in that too, so, or is there no cost to that to us? Or?
So I think, for the construction phase, what you'll see in 2029 is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking back there, but I want to say it's $1, maybe $2+ million.
Pretty big number. Okay. And then in this extension of Foster Street is, where did that all come about that we feel that we need to have that extension go through there to the back to that property? I don't understand that.
So it was identified in two places, I believe. One, when the Falcon Center project came in,
Okay.
there was concern about the limited access to that
From
facility
the city or from the university?
from the city.
Okay.
And so at the time, we asked them to modify their plan to allow us the possibility of we could extend Foster Street back through there. So we had the building a lot closer to the property line, so we had to go a little bit to the south.
So, sure.
And then the Main Street corridor, or the South Main Strategy was another document that we talks about trying to get a connection back there. And that was before the park was known, whether we were gonna do that Sycamore project. So the Sycamore project, in theory, is giving us a second established access. The issue is if, from a practical standpoint, it doesn't, right? Because it's, if the problem is one block in off of Main there, you basically, the only access then we would have is we have emergency access through the Falcon Center path.
Yep.
And then potentially the path down to the amphitheater. So we have some provisions to be able to get stuff back there, but there isn't.
So we're only really looking at it as if we further develop back there and like that one block if we lighted and build on there.
Yeah, we've not negotiated property. We don't have a final plan. There's no specific location for the road. So whether or not it's the house or the apartment building or something else, the power lines are a reasonable thing to be considered, but we don't have the plan that says we gotta move these 3 poles or we don't have to move these 3 poles. We're trying to be development forward focused to say, if we get a developer or somebody that comes in and says, hey, here's what I want to do this.
Okay.
And there's willing property signers. What we've heard from the council, what I've heard from the council consistently since I've been here is you're not interested in pursuing the eminent domain development. That's not something you consider. If it was a public infrastructure or something else that is needed, you might consider that. But so we're not looking to take anybody's house or apartment to put a road through. This would be something that would be nice to have if there was development back there, and we'd expect the developer to have to negotiate all that with the property owners.
All right, fair
Does that make
enough.
sense?
Yep.
So then moving into utilities, we reduced lead gooseneck replacements from $75,000 a year to $15,000 a year. That's a number that may change again in the future, but we need to first better understand, I guess, both the scope and the locations where this might be an issue before we dial in more of a well-defined project scope that we can then put more of a firm cost on it.
And I could just add, we do not have a list of lead gooseneck addresses. But we are reactive if we would dig up broken service or something. And we saw with lead gooseneck, we would replace it. We typically get 1 or 2 a year. So it's small. We don't believe there's that many nurses.
And so we also increased the Gulfview Tower repainting from $477,000 to $715,000. And this was based on an updated cost estimate that we just received from SCA in the last 2 days. Yeah. So, so we did update that planned cost, and then we increased the biosolids project from $8 million to $8.5 million in 2024. Similar to the Gulfview project, this was also based on an updated cost estimate. So we moved from our 30% design to our 60% design, and part of that process came with the additional or the new cost estimate rather, and that's where you're seeing that. We do have one more design that will add to 100%, but in conversations that I've had with Kevin, with certainly between now and that, we'll be looking to value and engineer to a point where we hopefully don't see too large of a cost increase, and we feel comfortable with this budget.
Sorry, it might be this way all night, but on the water tower, the one down at South Main, we got the university to contribute a little bit towards that. So the new one, have we talked to anybody about sponsorships on these water towers? I mean, you know, I could see it saying Scott Simpson Village or whatever, but you know, somebody might want to donate.
Person in town that would see it.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying though? I mean, the university was willing to donate money.
Well,
Why would not like Royal Credit Union or somebody say, yeah, we'll sponsor a sign?
Yeah, so I do think that actually is a possibility, but it's not one that we've pursued. We've taken the approach on the last two paintings, let's see, prior to Sycamore. So the Gulfview and the this one that we're
The north.
that we would rather advertise the community. So we're kind of putting a logo up on it. And then when we did Gulfview originally, when we had a repaint, we had I don't know what you call it, a basic painting or something done here. Still in my time with the city. We had that discussion there too. What do we do with it, the color and whatever? We decided just to do the roof wall spacing 35 so if people are coming in. So I don't know I have no idea what the market is for. I would just clarify that with the university, we just had them cover incremental cost. We didn't really get any sponsorship revenue or anything. It was, we paint just River Falls, it's this much. If we paint University of Wisconsin River Falls, it's this much, and they just paid the difference.
Yeah, it was trivial.
But if we're our largest, if we had another similar large water customer, I don't know that that's a terrible idea for us to think about.
Well, we're always talking about looking for sources for money, so that's a big billboard.
It is. So, and I don't know, you guys will get to talk about that later tonight about how you feel about off-premise signs. That's just what you want to be with your off-premise signs. Sycamore, we basically looked at it as an on-premise sign. It's right next to their campus.
Yeah, the location was so close to their athletic facility.
So if the council wanted to pursue that or ask us to pursue that, we would. If you don't specifically ask us, we're.
It might be worth just putting out flyers to them, says anybody ever interested, and what are you willing to give us?
I mean, would they give it to us without having it on the water, their name on the water card? I've never seen a city have like City of River Falls brought to you by Wisconsin Credit Union. Like I've never seen it.
Well, the university is asking us for money, and why can't we turn around and ask other people for money too? That's the way it is today.
Yeah, but
You ask, and if you don't ask, you don't really receive.
That's very true. But getting our name put up too.
But yeah, I mean, I think the number one
Thing is to brand us. Yeah, City of River Falls.
And there's opportunities for River Falls to create some artwork up there and actually increase the brand.
That would be interesting. But we could use some of the add arts to all the projects to help paint the water tower?
That's one of the discussions we've had.
I've seen some pretty interesting ones.
We could make it look like a little teapot.
I've seen rose mauling and I've seen golf ball on the TV. And I've seen,
Giant bobber.
there's several of them in Jordan that are peaches.
Yeah.
There's some in Washington State that are apples. So it's, that being said, staff is not planning to pursue any of those options. We will if the council wants, if the council collectively wants us to pursue something, otherwise it'll,
That logo that's up in the right
we
corner.
expect the golf view tower when we repaint it will likely be. You also, by the way, will have the opportunity to have this discussion again.
Yeah.
When you get a $700,000 contract. Decided like to do that. This is perhaps the number one thing that I've ever had a sticker shock over in my group. I cannot believe how much it costs to paint water towers.
Well, golf or the one over on Arch Street, Sycamore, that thing was, we might as well built a new one.
Yeah, in my career, I built a water tower bigger than Gulfview for 1.2 million. I mean, that was with the paint job and all the steel, just the prices on that stuff. There's like 2 vendors in the United States.
Yeah.
So, and the paint is, the coatings is part of the structural integrity and the water quality of the structure. So it's, you can't just make a decision that we don't want to paint it and you can't just send up the public works crew to do it either. So it's, we're in really bad shape. Municipalities are in really bad shape because we have almost no market leverage on this.
And it's inside.
It's really insane. There's room for collaboration. No, it's like, that would probably be 35 to 40% of the dream structure. And we'll have to do it every 20 years from now. So we don't need tanks anymore.
All right, well, I just wanted to bring it up for us to think out of the box.
So then for vehicles, we removed a planned vacuum truck expense in 2027, but we did keep costs in for 2025 with the intent being to refurbish existing vacuum trucks and just eliminate the expense in 2027 after discussions with Scott and Kevin. So that's really it for the large changes since workshop number 1. And then there were various funding source adjustments again. And this was a lot of Scott and I having conversations, making sure we want to right size some of our assumptions about funding sources, looking at our forecasts again and things like that. So there was quite a bit of that. So then looking at the expense side of the equation for the CIP, from workshop number 1 to workshop number 2, we did increase from 79.2 million to just over 80 million. I'm going to look at my notes here because I've got some of the breakdown for you. So for engineering, you see a difference there. That's the 3rd row down, 4th row from the title row there. We added the $30,000 for sidewalk for that Locust Street extension project that I mentioned. In facilities, that's where you would see the $500,000 increase for the fire station project. So we had 8.5 in there. It's now at 9. We wanted to get that trued up with latest estimates. For future development, we added $54,000 in there. That is for the planning for the Foster Street extension. For police, there's $60,000 that was added in 2025 for body-worn cameras, and the $21,000 for the flock camera system that I mentioned, and that's planned for in 2026. And then utilities, I just discussed, we have the Gulfview Tower repainting. We did do the reduction for the lead gooseneck replacements, the vacuum truck reduction, and then the increase to biosolids of $500,000. So those changes I just described is what brings you to the difference you see there. And then this is just to recap kind of the graphical presentation from last time and what it looks like. So same as before, utilities does still have the largest share of the planned expenses, followed by community development-based projects, tax increment district-based projects, and then facilities. So then getting on to the funding side, obviously because we are required to produce balanced budgets, it's going to be the same numbers you saw on the expense side there. The changes that you see, levy increased for one, for projects like the Hanson property acquisition, we actually reduced that by $324,000. We moved that to grants, but we did increase it for things like the body-worn cameras and the flock system and let's see, historic interpretive signs and the park amenities projects and Locust Street extension. The design portion of Locust Street, we wanted to fund with levy rather than borrow for that since it's just the design portion. The construction we will fund differently. So the grant revenues increased for projects like the Hanson property acquisition then because we shifted it away from the tax levy. Taxi van replacements, there is a grant portion for body-worn cameras. That's 50-50 levy and grant funding. And then the flock camera system as well. And then utilities cash financing actually decreased, and this is because of the vacuum truck being removed. So the borrowing that's shown toward the top there from revenue, that's also including utilities projects. But then, as I mentioned in the last workshop, when we assess the forecast, the cash flow forecast for utility funds, we do ultimately end up with a combination of revenue borrowing and cash financing to make the projects work. So that's what you're seeing there, where it says utilities, that's the cash financing portion, and that's because of the reduction. So moving on to the same chart that you saw last time, really the breakdown didn't change a whole lot from last time, but nevertheless I wanted to show it. So borrowing does still have the largest share of how we're financing the CIP, followed by utility cash financing and grants. So this continues to be a pretty grant-heavy capital improvement plan.
Can you kind of give me a broad overview? Or I know some of those are federal grants, some are DNR grants.
Yeah, so it's really everything. So it's DNR grants, it's state grants. We do have federal grants. I think there's even some funding in here for FEMA. So we actually call that out separately from just federal grants. So if I can get into.
So these sources are pretty solid. I mean,
well, so one of the conversations we have had here internally is ultimately, if we're going to fund something with grants and then we don't get the grant, we need to essentially come back to the council and have some internal conversations about, is this still a project that we feel strongly about proceeding with? Because if we do, we need to identify what that alternative funding source is going to be.
like the fire station.
Yeah, so I think where you see grant, of course, I come from more of the conservative approach as your finance director, but I would say if we don't get the grant, in all likelihood, we're probably not proceeding without some real intentional conversations about that, because our levy financing for these projects, the debt that we're planning in the CIP, the cash flow forecast for our utilities, we've got those policy parameters I talked about last time in mind, where if we suddenly need to use any of those sources of funding because we didn't get a grant, we then need to assess what that means for all those cash flow forecasts and our compliance with our own internal policy parameters. So that would really be a case by case basis.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm just expand on that a little bit. Josh, you can help me with that. So the Wasson state of Wisconsin, we have identified South Wasson Reconstruct and nearly 3.4 in the state of Wisconsin. And so that's going to show up in the grant revenue part of the portion of the pot. So 16%. So that 3.4 is going to be there, along with things like Collins Outfall, which we've identified a specific DNR project. That's not secured, right? Wasson is, we've signed these ones in the out year, we haven't, the stormwater plan that we have in here 25 is not the same one as the one we just received. So there's some that are right on the edge of, they're in the old capital plan, doing some of the work here going forward. But grant revenues for the Hanson property acquisition, Kinney corridor implementation, like general, 650,000. TID 14 would be Heritage Park River access. Affordable rentals required, fire station, and then the flock camera system, we have some share of that being grants, the park amenities. So the park amenities are things identified in the recent plan. And so we at first had like mostly donations in for that. And then now we're saying, well, we'll budget some donations, some grant money, and some city financing, because we expect that most of those grants have some match. So give you a practical. Didn't have a lot of flexibility though, because you know, some of these projects are just in as a grant. We know of grants that are like 90% or 100%, and so if we, like Josh says, if we don't get that, we're not assuming we'll come up with a levy, because we don't have that right now. We don't have that flexibility in the fiscal plan. And then the other one that I'll mention is kind of throws the numbers up. Josh, where's the Kinney corridor implementation? There's a bunch of TIDs that are impacted by that. So when you see TIDs 13%, again, this is a chart by funding source, not by the projects. So the mayor and I just talked about this. I mean, the Kinney corridor is in here for like $20, but we're not going to commit levy to do that if the projects are not authorized by the CIP. If we can't match the funding source to what the managed. So essentially what staff feels is if we've said something's going to be funded by donations and we don't get the donations, we would go back to the council and say, well, here's what happened. You still want to do this project or not? It said it was 2025, and you said it was 50,000. The project is still only 50,000, but we didn't get 40,000 in donations. And so we come back. So I don't know if that makes sense to the dude, but how this is laid out. And then we flipped it. So Josh is being kind. I mean, I probably sent 35 emails in the last number of days because I'm scrutinizing kind of what the strategy we've had, talking about conversations I've had with the council, my recollection of council's formal action, actually looking up formal action. So on the Kinney corridor, we really spent a lot of time. Like, what does the resolution say? What are the projects that are outlined? What did we tell the public we're going to do for funding sources? What's our agreement with Kinney ACC? So that what gets in the CIP is matching up to those documents. And then there's things like the HVAC in the library, which I just sent them an email and said, that's got to go geo. That's not a fundraising thing to fix the HVAC at the library. The elevator at the library, we just moved to library fund balance because that's not really a fundraising target. So the stuff in the study that was, I don't know where to draw the line, because everybody can decide differently, but the aspirational stuff or the enhancements or the next phase of the library's life, that stuff we kind of tried to put in the donation pile. And then I pulled back a few of the facility stuff that said maintain the asset. And I understand you can make that argument for the other stuff. I'm just saying there was a few that were easy to just pull and say HVAC controllers, that's an asset maintenance, we're gonna just do it. And we're gonna have to do it through geo bonding, which is gonna increase the levy. You know, it's gonna move us past our targets on in that for the library, but looks like it's got to be done to me. So that's what I'm recommending to you. So that was the upper and lower. And replacing, I think, unit number 4 or something there, the library. So there was a few of those where we moved 20,000 from one source to another. We said we were gonna get a $20,000 grant, and I was like, I don't know if we're gonna get that. It's still priority of the council, so we fund it. I don't know that we took out any projects though. I don't remember any projects where I'm like, we're not gonna get the money to just take it out. So there's still some aspirational things here where we're asking the council to approve it and say, yeah, if we can match this up, if it works, if the development comes, you'll do it. But at the end of 2028, you're not going to have spent this amount of money in these specific categories. I think that would be, if you do, Josh and I are going to find ourselves some really high paying jobs on Wall Street or something. That'd be pretty good. We're start making our best efforts. Same like the Foster. We're trying to say, okay, where's development headed? How's this working? When do we think the pressure to do that is going to come? We better put something in the CIP this case. But there's other projects we didn't put in, like the a western bypass of the city from 29 to 35. Because it doesn't look like it's in this time for us.
Gosh, you mentioned we took out the Hanson property acquisition?
We shifted from levy, to grant.
The grant.
Yes.
So from geo bond, and here it's geo bonds, you shifted it to grant.
Correct. Yes, sorry, geo bonds. Yep. So there actually is no planned geo borrowing at this point for 2024.
Is what's in here.
Yeah, and so that's my read on the council's willingness to do it. That it's a nice to have project, it's part of our master plan, but if you just had to levy that money to the community, you wouldn't do it. So that's why I swapped the funding source. We also have the Nelson Stewardship Fund is a reasonable thing for us to think over the course of 3 or 4 years, we could make a project that would grant. So that's how that's in there. Because I didn't think the council was indicating that that's a priority.
There's not enough pressure.
We don't have enough levy. I didn't see that that's in your top 10 things to spend levy on. So there isn't any levy left by the time we get to that property.
So this is a new slide from the last workshop too. I thought it might be helpful just to illustrate the share of projects in the CIP that we can consider to be providing for new assets versus ones that are just replacing or maintaining what we've already got. I don't think if you were to compare us to other Wisconsin municipalities, you're going to see a large difference here. They probably all look a bit like this, but I think it's all pretty helpful and illustrative just to show you how much of the CIP really does just go toward the replacement of and maintenance for assets that we've already got on the ground, in the ground, around the community. And as we add new assets, obviously future requirements to maintain and replace that then are required. So you start to see a bit of divergence there over time. And so there really was no other point here other than just to provide you with some additional context of kind of at the macro level of what we've got in here.
Are you using, is the blue number, is that the book value after depreciation, or is that the value that we assigned as we brought it on?
Yeah, so it's
we assigned
the value. So essentially it's the value of what you see here for when we have to replace it.
Okay.
Or if it's more of a repair. So, to the extent you're not necessarily extending the book value by repairing something necessarily, but the cost for repairing nevertheless in there categorized.
Okay.
Categorized later.
That's a good chart.
Yeah, I think it's illustrative, I guess, of what you have. So then going back to the levy funded projects, we touched on this last time. So again, just a reminder, when you get out into the future years of the fiscal plan, those really are just placeholders beyond 2026. So we took the 2026 planned levy, and this is cash financing for the capital projects. So not borrowing, cash financing. And we just took what was planned in 2026 and kind of extended it out because we don't have that current fiscal plan at this point. You can see what the estimated percentage of the levy. I won't go through all this in detail again because I did that last time. But really, what I want to call attention to is that bottom row there, where it's the estimated percent of levy. So you can see in 2024 we start out at 8%, and that's because of how, again, to touch on a point I made last time too, we're still leveraging the dollars that we have. So you do see, I guess, compared to the rest of the CIP, a larger amount of the percent of levy going to cash financing capital projects there. But then it does drop down to 4% in 25, and then it is as low as 2% in 26 and 28. You can see what the estimated mill rate above that then would be, and that's on, that would be, for example, in 2024, 42 cents per $1,000 of assessed property value is what you'd expect to go toward cash financing capital projects. So again, you do see in 2025, the levy support there did go up, and that's because of some of the changes I mentioned earlier, some of the police projects that we introduced into the CIP that weren't in there for the first workshop that we are financing with levy dollars are what drive that up. The rest of the years beyond 25 do remain fairly significantly below what was targeted in the fiscal plan. So that may be part of the conversation we have as we jump into fiscal plan development is it time to perhaps set some new targets given the stresses that we're seeing with inflation and what that means for operating costs for things we have to still maintain. So then getting into the estimated GO borrowing, as I mentioned before, there were some adjustments to the planned borrowing. So you can see what the new estimated percent of the state limit is. That would be the third row up from the bottom. So we're still below 50% of the state's general obligation indebtedness limit in all 5 years of the CIP. And then that bottom row, of course, as I mentioned before, some of our general obligation borrowing is actually for debt that the utilities finance. So when you back off those revenue sources, you're then left with the amount of your total general obligation indebtedness that you'd be looking for your tax levy to be supporting. So you can see what that is every year as well. And then the top portion of the chart, of course, shows what we're bringing onto our total indebtedness in each year of the 5-year CIP. So then this is going to look similar to the cash financing of the levy from a couple slides ago, but this is for our annual debt service levy requirement. So again, there's an estimated mill rate, and then there's an estimated percent of levy that represents. And similar to cash financing for capital projects, we're actually below the target that was provided for in the current fiscal plan for all 5 years of the CIP, but of course we assume 27 and 28 is just a carryover of what the target was for 2026, since we don't have, what was it, 20%. Yeah, so 20% of the tax levy was contemplated as going toward debt service in the fiscal plan. So we're not there at this point, and we're under $1 per $1,000 of assessed value for the mill rate, the estimated mill rate. And again, that assumes 1% increase in your assessed value every year. So that likely is conservative given our recent experience. And the more that the assessed value increases beyond the 1% we modeled for here, you'll actually see a lower mill rate then as a result of that. So I would categorize this as fairly conservative in its approach.
And you're going to talk, you're going to provide the fiscal plan context.
Yes.
So I don't be too far ahead. The question you may want to hold on to is why didn't Scott and Josh recommend 4% borrowing, which meant 4% more projects funded? We'll talk about that when we get to fiscal plan. This one's under target, but we've got other ones that are over target. So not a lot of optimism that we can just cut those to free up the money for our debt service.
So some projects of council interest before I get into that fiscal plan preview then. Same list as last time. So the Hoffman Park Master Plan implementation is not in the current CIP, nor is the Glen Park Master Plan implementation for phase 2 of what was in that plan. Public Works building, both design and construction are not in this plan. Additional dog parks, maybe more than one or just one is not in here. Downtown Master Plan and downtown alley upgrades are not in this current CIP. So then fiscal plan preview. So getting to Scott's point, you'll see a lot of TBDs or to be determines there for 25 and beyond. And the reason for that is we are going to be getting into our fiscal plan preparation. But what you see is generally when we think about our levy and we think about how it's allocated, these are those 5 buckets I described at the last workshop that we have to kind of organize all of our allocated levy into. So we have a general fund portion. We have a street maintenance portion, which really is part of the general fund, but we do call it out separately. Then we have the library portion, general obligation debt service, and capital cash financing. Now, assuming there are no further changes to the CIP as far as the capital cash and general obligation financing is concerned, those numbers are then fixed. What you see up here, subject to when we actually go and borrow, these are estimates, of course, so those will get somewhat refined when we actually go to issue and get our amortization schedules, because these are just estimates. But they're not going to deviate. The capital cash financing won't deviate at all. What we plan to finance cash-wise is fixed. Geo debt service, within some reasonable margin of error, are going to be around those numbers each year. So then what we need to figure out as we transition into the fiscal plan is how much levy do we want to allocate to the general fund, including street maintenance, then how much levy do we want to allocate to the library? Keeping in mind, of course, that we're subject to levy limits here in Wisconsin. So we have a finite amount of an increase for levy from one year to the next. And we have to keep that in mind when we're essentially setting that very bottom number for total levy. So then within that framework where we're limited in growth from one year to the next, we then have to figure out how to fill that in the middle and how much of that finite amount of levy increase goes across each of those categories. So then if I move one slide forward, this is essentially the same information, but you see the mill rate impact. So this actually shows, now this is the city-only portion of the total mill rate. It does not include the tax increment district portion. So you could think of this as just the city's operating and capital mill rate, excluding kids rather. And it's not broken down by county. So you would actually see a slightly different number depending on what county you reside in. But if you just put all the numbers together, total levy, total assessed value for the community, that's going to be your kind of gross mill rate. So that was $5.54 per $1,000 of property value in 2023. Now in 2024, we're actually tentatively subject to the fiscal plan update that will be coming back to you with. We have the potential to maybe see that number go down. And that's something we certainly can discuss as we get into the fiscal plan preparation. The rest of it, of course, is largely to be determined, and it depends on our conversation about operating costs and inflation, things like FTEs, all of those things that impact your operating budget for both the general fund and the library. Keep in mind those levy limits, of course, and then how much do we want to allocate? How much can we allocate? So, Scott, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, or if that generally encompassed what you wanted to touch on, but that's kind of a preview of where this will be going next. We've sort of set those bottom 2 rows, the capital cash and the general obligation debt, subject to future debt issuance, but should be right around that number. And then we'll need to have some conversations as part of the fiscal plan about those top 3 rows.
Yeah, the point has been made, I think, but we wanted to be thoughtful about eating up the 550 with the capital, because We haven't, both the general fund and the library portion are above target for fiscal. So with not any, I don't think any easy or quick fixes to change their trajectory, so it's not. So if we just move the debt service and everything up to the max, it just puts more pressure on the operating side. So something's got to give. So we don't want to be put in that pinch, at least not in the 25, 26. You know, we're trying to project out there. So that's why, that is why there is more debt service funding through the CIP, because I just think that put us in the first spot trying to meet the operating obligations. So that's the main point there, is just that levy has a ceiling unless you want to go referendum. So, which we don't think is what you want to do urgently. You may do it eventually, but right now, that's not what you heard the council at. So then, if we know we only have a certain amount of levy, assessed valuation is only going to go up so much. That means our rate is basically going to be set. And so if we spend 31 cents on a cash and 77 cents on a GO debt, well, then we have, a little bit left. And that doesn't get better as you go on, which is also why we try to control the capital cash financing, because the GO debt service numbers go up. So we're trying to keep the cash, what we're financing the cash down. We're not putting ourselves in any threat or we're not shifting all the borrowing from cash, or we're not making any big shifts there. These are just things we're trying to glide towards the out years, because 23 and 24 aren't really the problem. You start to get to 29, 30 and you don't change the trend, then you're either going to have to cut back on your operating or cut back on your debt, or ask for a lot. Maybe not a lot. A lot more is really not a good number. That's not a number. It's all subjective to what people are willing to pay in the value proposition, but it's not nibbling. It wouldn't be just adding a penny or something to the levy to get those numbers to change. There's no crisis. There's no, mass layoffs or anything imminent.
No fiscal cliff.
But if you don't, no, you're working against, there's no fiscal cliff that I see, but if there is one, it's 29, 30, 31. It means that we wouldn't have the growth that we're hoping to have. It means a bunch of things didn't go well for us, but I still think that's our job, is to plan for not everything working out perfectly. And then if the results are better, like, what you're seeing from 23 to 24 is the results are better than planned. So you'll either be able to go 3 cents up on the levy and maximize the levy limit, or you'll be able to provide that relief in the rate. So that's some choices we'll have ahead of us. The challenge is we're not experiencing cost savings. Capital plans you used to, put this one in for a fire truck, and you go up and it might be 20,000 less than what you put in the capital plan. What we're seeing is the opposite, and even so, then you see the jump from 400,000 to 700,000 for the paving project. So you're not likely going to have lots of good news in the bidding and others, just because of the inflation is. That the only way that would happen is if the economy goes bad, which then has pressure on your assessed valuation anyways. You're not going to win. You're not going to win by getting better prices and stuff, because that probably means that assessed valuation is going down, economic activity is down, sales tax receipts are down. So we're planning for things to be reasonably optimistic, but there's real pressure here, because we don't have that many levers to pull. The share revenue increase, that potentially gives you a window to the fire station. that you likely wouldn't have had without a huge grant being 50% of the cost, or something else, you know, somebody sponsoring the fire station. Which has happened in other communities, but it's usually like a multi-billion living in like a town of 3,000. So I don't know that it's gonna luck out on that. We also took the park projects and things out, so going back to the list of what we didn't do. If the library is gonna be expected and out doing fundraising for their projects, we don't think they're gonna be able to, I'll just speak for myself, I don't think they're gonna simultaneously be able to ask for Hoffman Park money. The community doesn't, I don't see that it's a big step, but like, well, don't worry, I can give to the library and give to Hoffman Park. And maybe they are. That hasn't been my experience in communities. Usually you try to focus on what are we raising money for? What's our focus? What's our priority? And that's where the resources go. Because I know some of them individually have asked, why can't we put this, why can't we put Glen Park this thing? Why can't we put something maybe parking lot park? I don't see us being able to handle that at the same time. So it's a possibility. It's something that could work and has worked in other communities to raise money for parks and things. But right now, we're kind of putting our eggs in the library basket for fundraising going forward for this. Yeah. But like I said, that doesn't mean there isn't donations in there for some other things, but they're pretty small overall. Overall, the donation wedge is almost all library. I think, and probably some key quarter from the KCC. Yes.
And with the library, I think Jeff's idea about going to businesses and corporations in town is a great idea for the library.
Up there in the meeting rooms.
Right.
It's like the university school.
Right. I don't know who's in charge of that, but.
Well, I think, like an example, like the water tower, from my perspective, I guess, with the hat that I wear, I would recommend the approach we have where we're not necessarily showing as being funded that way, but certainly we can then attempt to do that because that way we've at least provided for the maximum cash financing, borrowing for financing that we may need in the event that the donations don't work out. Because again, we've got these policy parameters we try to plan around. So we just want to be mindful that we leave ourselves room for if fundraising doesn't work out, we still need to do it. We want to make sure we've got the capacity within our policy parameters as we use forecasts and stuff. So I would always recommend the more conservative approach of assuming we're going to have to try to fund something like that with borrowing or utility cash. And that if we certainly do some sort of a campaign and we are successful, then we don't need as much borrowing for cash. That's, of course, excellent.
And it doesn't mean that if a community member came forward or you connected us with a community member, civic group, and they said, we have $400,000 and we want to do X, that because it's not a CIP, you can't do it. That's not how we've operated in the past. It just would trigger the conversation differently, and so there's not a lot in here. For example, the baseball council and others have been talking about this indoor facility. It's not in our capital. If you could put it in, council members could say, well, we want to put it in, you want to put it in 100% donations, kind of giving a nod to the group that, hey, just go out, raise your money, and do it. We're taking the approach that we're not opposed to it, but it's probably not to the point that it gets into a city CIP. But if the group comes and says they have $2 million to build a building, well, then they can talk. We will facilitate that conversation on your behalf until it reaches a point where there's a policy decision to make. But we're certain none of you want us to persuade people that want to invest in the community ways that are within our scope. With that. So,
Scott, tell me again, did we ever set a policy? I know we talked about it, I thought we said it, of how much of the percentage of the total project has to be donated for naming rights? Remember that?
I remember a conversation, I don't know if we adopted a policy.
Was it
Do you remember what that was about? Which
That
project?
Might have been in Glen Park East,
Glen Park.
the, what is it, Amy?
We have any policy, but I don't think that's the number.
I don't know if we got the number in. We talked about how,
We talked
there was
about,
a question about if people need to be deceased or can they be
yeah,
living don't,
Yeah.
living names.
here's $10 for the $4 million project. Yeah, who will give any money? I mean, I think it was about the warming shelter and the ice rink when Rotary was talking about it. How much would we need to raise in order to call for voting? If I remember.
I do remember the conversation.
I want to say it was like 40%,
And we did,
but I'm not sure.
we either have a policy or a strategy. I'm not sure which was adopted by the council said to staff. Because if it's a strategy, then it would have been something council said to staff, just take our feedback and we'll put it together. Policy would have been something.
Because I think we need to have that in place before we run around asking for donations. Because otherwise, they'd say, okay, we'll give you 25 grand and we get our name on the water tower.
Yep.
Oh, wait a minute.
And we're not planning to do example with the library projects, that would be run by the library board and the foundation board. I'm sure they'll communicate with the council about their goals and strategies, but they would be very thoughtful about that. So what we did in the capital plan doesn't mean that's exactly how everything needs to go. That's not the prioritization based on what the library board wants. Here's the projects we need to study. Talked to the library director, Tommy said, here's the study. Is this the right study? Yes, it is. All right, then we tried to translate those in, and then we put 25% each year forward. If the consultant says, if the capital campaign consultant says, no, you can do this first, if we can get this million, that's how they'll be guided, not by the CIP. What the council signal is, you are supportive of the enhancements of the library if they can go out and get the money.
Right.
You're not going to throw a whole bunch of roadblocks in their way to go ahead and do that.
And they've got some statutory autonomy.
On the operating side, they do, and then once it's built, they do what for
But
these.
hopefully they would
for these
understand the direction of the council if we set this naming policy.
I think what you're saying is, in the absence of anything else, including the naming policy or some other policy we would pass, that they should use the guidance.
Scott, you do have a naming policy.
Yeah, I think she said it's 2017, December 2016.
It's 25,000 or more. Major donations go to council for approval, and typically the guideline is for 50% or more of the cost.
Okay, thank you. I knew there was something.
So it's a guideline.
It's a guideline.
Yes, but they,
It's a suggestion.
so that it's a policy, but within the policy, you're signaling that.
Yeah.
If somebody needed 49% of the project, it wouldn't exclude them from getting
As long as it's 25.
things or more. So, so backing up to that. So I believe what you're signaling as a council in August, if you approve the CIP the way it's presented, is that you're giving wide latitude to the library board to determine within that big parameter how they're going to come up with that money. That may include them coming back to you and saying, we're gonna raise this much, but we need this much levy, this much GO, whatever, and then you can have that discussion. But what you're saying is, go ahead and do those projects that are in your plan if you can fundraise for that. And that you're not gonna throw roadblocks in the way or nitpick at it. And this is my words, in my term, that you're not gonna get caught up and saying, well, we didn't really want you to do that part of your plan, or we thought you were gonna raise more money. You're basically saying, yes, you can make additions to the library, you can work on that stuff. Doesn't mean they won't do site planning, it doesn't mean they won't talk to our community development department or city engineer to get advice about things. But it's a big signal. It isn't as friendly of a signal as, and we'll also put $1 million in the pot. But you just saw the slide. I went over that.
So how much as a percentage is the library going to become of the total budget?
That's to be determined by council. And we have our target right now, we have a trajectory, we're working on that. If they build $3.5 million addition, there'll be operating costs impacts to that to be determined. Some of them might create efficiencies and others will create inefficiencies as far as costs, right? Or square footage or a different alignment or something might change the cost. So that's not been part of the discussion.
Okay,
I think generally we assume the council was pro-library, pro-expansion, and that you're not signaling to them, no, keep everything the same, just shrink. So hopefully I read that correctly. And then you also are signaling that you're putting a lot of oomph into the Kinney Corridor. That's basically your big investment going forward. There's TID money, there's donations, there's federal grants, there's no levy. There's some stormwater utility, there's some water utilities, electric
thought I
utilities.
saw geo debt in there.
There would be GO. It's not borrowing for those would be amenities you have to approve initially, likely through some ACC or other groups. And so that's a good point. If the council wanted to restrict the level of activity in the 5 years on that corridor plan, certainly could do that. We essentially put most or all of the plan in the CIP, not funded with much, non-donated, non-grant money. But you could, as a council, say you only want to do 2 dams, light restoration, and that's it.
I thought that's kind of what we were going at. That's why the Kinney Corridor, the Kinney collaboration is there for anything other than that.
Well, what I mean is we have those other projects in there with donations, cases, and others. What I'm saying is the council could even take the step to say, we don't want you out there shopping that stuff yet. We want to first, in this 5 year, the council could say, we just want you to focus on the first primary project, and that's it. That's not the approach staff took. We took the approach that the Kinney Corridor plan is approved. You got an implementation strategy. We have a decent framework with KCC. We're starting to get a good framework with Army Corps. We had enough information to kind of put the kitchen sink in the CIP. But going back to the conversation Josh had at the beginning, all of that stuff is going to require some other approval by the council because the spending amounts, for purchasing policy and all that. You're going to do an MOU or LOI or something with these groups. Kayakers United even said they wanted to implement the kayak launch. You'd still have that coming back to you as an approval.
Where are we at with the Army Corps of Engineers in the process?
Amy Peterson and I and others are spending the whole day with them tomorrow in town, so I'll be here. We'll get the library. Yeah, we're spending the day at the library. This is staff work meetings. They're not public engagement meetings. It's not the fanfare yet, but it's all the engineers and planners meeting each other and kind of working out the. So it's an exciting milestone. River Falls Day week. But it was convenient for them, less convenient for us.
So then just to wrap it up, staff will continue finalizing the plan in this document. So there will be some maps added to this, some cover sheets, other helpful documents that can help the public once this goes on the website as a final kind of navigate what's in here. So then we do still plan on submitting the final document for council approval at the first meeting in August. 2024 is what you'll be asked to then appropriate for budgeting and spending, kind of budgeting authorization, and then Scott mentioned where applicable, we come back for spending authorization on an as-needed basis. But in November, as part of the 24 budget process, you'll be asked for the budget authorization for us to go ahead and appropriate funds. We'll move into fiscal plan next with the intent of coming back to you in September with a review of the 24 through 28 fiscal plan. We are still in the process of completing the cost of service studies for electric, water, and sewer utilities. And as I mentioned, first workshop, we will likely be coming back to you with some discussions in the future about rates and rate implications based on findings of those cost of service studies, which will include the projects for the utilities that you see in this plan. So we've already sent draft documents of this off to our consultants that they're using for those. And then of course, for the fire station, continuing work with the Rural Fire Association and thinking about borrowing and funding splits in the future, as that will have some impact on what we ultimately do for implementing that project. So, any questions? Questions for us?
So Josh, are we gonna get a final book as well?
If you would like one, our intent was to make it available electronically, but if folks want hard copies, we absolutely will make those available.
I don't.
Okay, if you just want to email.
Electronic's fine.
Electronics fine.
Okay.
This is a letter.
If you change your mind, email me, we'll make it available. It's no problem.
I have another donation question. We're talking about the Whitetail Ridge Mountain Bike Trail. Have we looked at getting sources from Tattersall or from other people, considering it would directly benefit them
Yes.
and that they're willing to donate in? Well, you talk to them.
Yes, we are having conversations with primarily through Kidney off-road cyclists, but we're also talking to bicycle-friendly businesses or businesses that have already identified themselves interested in working for the city or the city. And Cork has identified some of those too. So maybe that they're doing. There's also some families that are interested in supporting, so we're kind of keeping that network going, try to see how it goes.
Yeah, it's not a big number, but it just seems like it's just a few, and those few should be the ones donating or contributing towards it.
Thank you.
If you have more questions on individual projects, I'm going to let Josh or anyone. You don't have to go through me, obviously, you can go directly to Josh if you have questions. And you want it again at 6:30? Seems to be really good for us.
Sounds good.